to today's webinar from the Open Group, which today is being brought to us by Orbis Software, a member of the Open Group. Before I hand over to our speaker, Peter Harrod, today, I would just like to go over a few housekeeping issues to keep the event moving forward smoothly. I'd encourage you to submit questions during this event. There are two ways you can do that. You can either submit a question via the text chat facility, or probably the most efficient way is to use the text QA facility. If you do submit a question in either of those text areas, I ask you to address your questions to all participants. That way everyone gets to see all the questions that are being submitted. And we handle the questions at the end of the presentation. This event is also being recorded in total, so if for any reason you have to leave early, or if you experience any local technical difficulties, then a recording of this event will be available from tomorrow. And everyone who's registered for this event will get an email that will contain a URL where you can access that recording. So Peter, if you're ready, can I hand over to you?
Simon. Well, welcome to this webinar. Now today we're going to be talking through some answers that we've given to our customer base about a very pressing question in enterprise architecture. Where to start? Necessarily, when you start doing your modeling, you have to pick and choose what you trade on first. So we're going to go and share some of the advice that we've given to our customers in addressing this problem. We'll start by introducing Orbis and ourselves, how we got to this point giving this webinar. Considering what we're actually talking about when we mention abstraction, because enterprise architecture modeling does involve a couple of different forms of abstraction. So it's useful to set the parameters of this discussion. And then about the connection between iteration and abstraction. Business. When you do close choices, we're going to concentrate on this area first. We're going to remove or abstract away the details of other areas. Often with the intention that you'll return and add more detail in later. The second reason for considering this is the TOGAF specification actually has some pretty good advice on ways that you might want to approach the abstraction question. And then talk about some examples of ways in which you might want to approach the challenge of where do you start, how do you abstract, various use cases, various scenarios that are prompting you to do enterprise architecture modeling. Therefore, we'll list some conclusions and open the floor up to questions and answers. So let's reiterate why we are coming to this topic. Finally, I've done it. You've got a thumbs up from the board. CI has given you your mandate. Now go ahead and start the modeling process. You can start doing your enterprise architecture. You can start trying to add value. What do you now? We've been asked again and again by potential customers. As a producer of modeling tools, we necessarily get asked by prospects and customers, what's your advice? What do you work with other customers? So, in the spirit of contributing to the community, let's set some of the advice and some of the education that we provide to our customers in answer this question. But before we start talking about how to solve the problem, let's see what the problem is. What is it? There's decks nowadays that were complete without a reference to Wikipedia. Wikipedia and the TOGAF 9 specification have some definitions of is abstraction. So what TOGAF 9 has to say about the question first. Technique of providing summarized or generalized descriptions of detailed and complex content. Focus for analysis that is concerned with a consistent and common level of detail. Consistent level of definition and understanding to be achieved in each area of the architecture. And then media. Abstraction is a process by which concepts are derived from the usage and classification of literal concepts. Now, the first specification is better than Wikipedia in this respect because it is a very important point. Why are you doing this? See? To effective communication and decision making. Relevant issues before further detail is attempted. So, in essence, when we talk about abstraction, and particularly we talk about abstraction in the enterprise architecture context, we're talking about ignoring certain details. The particular choice that we're going to focus on some areas to the detriment of others. Doing that because you can't get a handle on everything at once, so we focus on the key areas of concern to us. And that's a very important observation, very important thing to bear in mind as we go through the rest of the discussion today. Toga has nailed it on the head. You're abstracting to make it manageable, to focus on the details so that you communicate effectively. The kind of ways that abstraction appears in enterprise architecture. First form of abstraction is the familiar layers that we all know and love. Business, data, application, technology. Here, when we're abstracting, is we're things from a particular perspective. When we talk about business architecture, we're focusing really on how the business operates. What are the functions? What are the processes? What are the goal drivers, and so on. So we're not really caring at that point about applications are we using in enterprise architecture. What is technology, infrastructure looking like? The deliberate decision that we're going to focus on first as a way of down. It's one form of abstraction with enterprise architecture, operating layer by layer. And this BDAT, Business Data Application Technology paradigm, I think I agree, it's very much permeated into the whole mindset of enterprise architecture modeling. But there is a kind of abstraction, and that one I'm going to consider today. So, when you're considering things at the business level, you may be considering everything. For example, you're going to focus on doing functional modeling first, or process modeling. Is it right to only focus on one layer at a time? Depends on the project, really. And we'll consider that as we go through the examples. So we're not going to do a revision exercise on the difference between business architecture and application architecture. What we want to discuss in this session is how do you decide, how do you identify which is to focus on first. And there is really an area of TOGAF that does apply here. Some of you are familiar with the enterprise continuum. Here, that you have a continuum of architectures and a continuum of solutions that deliver those architectures. Key points going from foundation, common system, industry, organizational specific, is that the systems or the industry or the organizational specific, they are more details, less abstract, the fashion architectures. Within the continuum, you do have the architecture continuum. From to left, it's more generic. From left to right, it's more detailed, more specific. And your solutions continuum of how you deliver those. So, when considering abstraction, it's worth revising your understanding of the enterprise continuum in how you can go from a higher level of high level of abstraction to a higher level of detail. At the definition of the enterprise continuum, it talks about abstraction. It's about how you might iterate at a particular area. For example, if focus is on the architecture context, you might go through that several times. Or if you need to focus on your current state definition, you can do that multiple times. All of you can read this in the TOGAF spec, asking why am I reiterating what you already know. And it highlights a very important and subtle point about this iteration. The iteration of the TOGAF spec was consider you might iterate on different parts of the ADM and different parts of your enterprise architecture rollout, and based on what is the focus, what are your identified problem areas. If you're concerned on how you govern the architecture, then you might focus on phases G and H. Likewise, if you've had problems in rollouts, in doing transitions in the past, you iterate on your opportunities and solutions, where you identify possible work packages, possible programs, and your micro planning. So the point in considering the iteration is not that you can iterate. Most people can figure that one out by themselves. But in defining what you iterate, driven by what are your pain points, what are your areas of focus, what are your drivers in the original enterprise architecture initiative or initiatives. And this is why the iteration chapter is an area that I'm highlighting in this section, because that chapter of TOGAF gives us some quite interesting use cases and provide specific suggestions on how you would focus your iteration, focus your drilling to greater levels of detail, depending on project driver. That's relevant to our specific discussion is that implicit in this definition of the areas that you iterate, it is what are your areas of focus, i.e., what are the keys that you don't abstract details, what is where you focus in, you drill down. Conclusion. This the iteration chapter is it delivers a very subtle but very useful observation. When deciding where do you start first, deciding which areas do you abstract and which areas do you focus in on, always go back to why were you doing enterprise architecture modeling in the first place? What do you achieve? What are your areas of focus? And this high-level answer that we give our customers when advising them on what areas to look into first. Main points. and defined approaches, what I'm going to do now is consider some examples of enterprise architecture focus, enterprise architecture projects that we've encountered in the field, how that principle that I've defined, focus on the key areas, translated into an actual project in each of those use cases. So, first area that we are encountering an awful lot at the moment is capability mapping. Assigned to do enterprise architecture, what should we focus on when we probe? Well, man is particularly concerned to understand what are our business capabilities, our organizational capabilities, and accomplish them. Well, capabilities are the focus, then capabilities are the area that you should map first. By drawing a capability map, I'm sorry, just bear with me, I'm seeing that there is some audio problems. Okay, for the time being, I'll monitor the chat to see if people are having further problems. Okay, so as I was saying, with a level capability map, then iterate in two directions. Go to levels of detail in your capability mapping, and at the same time, start linking your capabilities to which processes deliver them, which actions deliver them. If of the organization is more on technical capabilities, such as in investment banks, they're often very concerned about speed of response and trading response. They map them to infrastructure more. The point here is, what are goals, what are your drivers for doing the enterprise architecture rollout, and from that decide on which areas of detail to focus on first. A second very popular area at the moment is on portfolio management. Specifically, how do we define our application portfolios, how do we slim them down, how do we understand what supports what. So here, our focus on the applications, and our particular concern is going to be what applications can we retire. So focus on the most important applications first, the ones that everyone uses, and then drill down to less well-used ones before mapping them to functions and data. Again, taking what is the concern of the organization, what is the driver for doing the enterprise architecture modeling, and drilling down into a greater level of detail for those areas that are relevant to the project. A very common scenario that we run into where enterprise architecture has been given a thumbs up is where a major project that's being worked on. Specifically, the rollout of the system. SAP is by far the most common scenario there. Organization that's moving to SAP to consolidate its portfolio, or simply to upgrade or to roll it out. So in this case, the key point, the key area of focus is on getting that AP rolled out. So we would advise a customer facing that problem, focus on diagramming the layout, the structure of that major system, and then iterate down to how the individual modules connect to other applications, support business functions, support processes. common area at the moment is on IT road mapping. When are customers coming online? When are they being retired? What did what? And the advice here, in terms of deciding what to abstract away, well, the focus of management is not about process. It's not about business function decomposition. It's the system roadmaps. So first on defining system maps to start out with. Then less important systems, the ones with less spend, less users. And in time branch out to analyzing their dependencies between them. Another comment, project portfolio management. People on this webinar are starting to see a theme here. The focus in programs and projects and consolidation, they're affecting, where are the touch points between them. So start by identifying the programs and projects. Start with key ones, the high spend ones. Then iterate down to lower level ones and start linking them to the systems and the business functions that they touch. A common use case that we're encountering out in the field is on infrastructure management. Or sometimes don't even know what their infrastructure is, and they engage in a large project to consolidate it and understand it. Quite often when there's been a merger of organizations, or within some kind of divestment of business units. The focus is on your infrastructure. Steps, so start by defining your overall backbone. Down into greater levels of detail. Focus on individual site networks and link into the actual backbone. So once we define what is the area of focus, and note in this picture, we're not even considering the business functions or the applications because we're meeting the actual need of the organization. Then the advice that we've been giving our customers in doing EAing who want to know where to start, what area to not consider, and which areas to focus on. Remember, why are you even talking about abstracting away certain areas? Because you want to focus in on what's important. So I go back to the architecture project and why are you given the go-ahead? What concerns that allocate funds for doing enterprise architecture modeling? There are tensions of abstraction, business, application technology. Today we've been considering the idea of focusing in on one specific area. More detail into that. And the area you focus on, as I say, must be defined by what are the concerns of management. And that is being able to take that particular general principle and relate to your own project with some examples, but also, as always, the TOGAF specification, given the help. A chapter on iteration, chapter 19 of the spec, it talks about areas that you might focus on depending on whether you're doing project portfolio management, consolidation, and it applies a model of how you might identify what are the concerns of your project to enable you in identifying areas to focus on first, areas to iterate down to. Thanks for everyone's time today. this presentation will be available via the Orbis website. At this point, I'm going to open up the floor to any questions and discussion.
Peter, many thanks. We do have a question that's just come in on the QA facility. Peter, we've got a question here from Mike asking, could you clarify the terms rationalization of architecture components in an EA as so mapping of a newer building block back to the architecture landscape?
Yes, that's a reasonable way of describing one way that you would approach organization. Found that organizations use building blocks to a greater or lesser extent depending on the organization, cultural factors, and so on. In terms of rationalization in EA, that is one aspect of rationalization. For example, I've got organizations where their focus is very much on the infrastructure within a department. In those cases, they tend not to use building blocks so much. There seems to be some discussion of the best way to do building blocks in network architecture. But certainly if you're a building block focused company, which is the way to go, then rationalization would, in my opinion, a case of trying to narrow down your number of building blocks advertised.
Well, we don't seem to have any other questions on the text or chat, so if anyone does have a question, please submit them now. Peter, if people want to get hold of this slide deck, what's the best way for them to do that, Peter?
We'll be having this slide deck available via Orbis website. Just go to www.orbissoftware.com and go on, register, and you'll be able to download it. Also, please feel free to email inquiries at orbissoftware.com, and we can email it to you.
That's Peter, thank you. Well, in the meantime, we've had a few more questions come in. This is a question from Michael Confoy. He writes, very good presentation. I like the focus perspective. With very projects making use of TOGAF Archimate in organisation using the same modelling tool, how would you recommend integrating their work into the EA model?
Okay, I have to a little bit bad here, Simon, and I've seen complaints about the audio quality, so I won't be using this venue again. Could you repeat the question?
Of course, and it is from Michael. He says, very good presentation. I like the focus perspective. With projects making use of TOGAF Archimate in the organisation in the same modelling tool, would you recommend integrating their work into the EA model? So,
if I understood the question then, we've got an scenario where we've got a variety of projects doing solution architecture, but the question is more how we would integrate solution architectures into an enterprise architecture. So in that situation, what I would say is it depends obviously on the cultural factor. What sort of kudos, what kind of power does the enterprise architecture department have to mandate a solution? If they're purely on documentation, then there's a variety of tools, there's a variety of mechanisms you can use. Merge architectures. Obviously, I'm clearing out ours particularly, but others in the space, such as Truist, I believe they have abilities to merge as well. There's a case, I think, of trying to identify common themes with common projects. So if you've got several projects for a web, or involving a web interface, then see what commonalities you can have. From that, define an enterprise architecture. Likewise, if you're working for, say, a transportation company, airlines and train companies and so on, reservation systems are the king of your space. So identify if there's a common way that products are interfacing into your reservation system, and try and define a enterprise architecture. I've understood the question correctly, and that's a useful answer.
Peter, thank you. Question here from Alan Saltzman. Alan says, mapping this to a resource-loaded schedule would be great. Is such an artifact available? And he says, for example, an MS project file.
Okay, so it's not something we've created ourselves. I can see the value of doing it, but I would imagine that would be quite a detailed project. So somebody to produce a reference plan in that manner, because you'd have to consider how would you tailor it, how you adjust it to constraints and organizational constraints. Well, win the lottery and I go off to do a PhD, then I think maybe I've got a thesis, or if somebody else is listening, it would form quite a research project for someone.
Thanks, Peter. Question here from Prashant, saying, presently we use Provision in our enterprise. What would a good approach to moving to Archimate for our solution architecture and enterprise architecture artifacts?
Provision, I'm assuming the tool.
I think.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to have to plead ignorance on what support Provision has for the Archimate standard. I know that we support Archimate. There's a couple of other tools out there that do it as well. I've heard of Archi as an open source free tool, although that's not got the collection you get from a vendor tool. I'm afraid I could answer that sensibly, but my knowledge of Provision is not enough for me to comment. I'd recommend contacting Provision, or of course visiting our site to see how we support Archimate. We do give away a bunch of Archimate templates and resources on our website, so maybe devolve down to Visio while you're contacting Provision to see what they can do.
Thanks. A question here about asking for a little bit more information about the information layer, a specific number of recommended entities, for example. You got anything more you can illuminate on that, Peter?
In terms of the recommended number of entities, well, what I'm going to say there is I'm going to kind of reiterate what I said before. There's a story. When Mozart gave one of his musical pieces, I think it was the Emperor of Austria came to him and said, "Too noisy, Mozart, far many notes." The film Amadeus, which I can recommend to everyone. And I'm not writing here. What I'm saying is I'm setting up the scene for what Mozart's response was, which was, there are as many notes as are required. To answer the question, why are you doing information architecture modeling in the first place? And what number of entities do you need to answer that? So, for example, Amtrak, they wanted to define an enterprise information model, and they didn't really have a number of target number of infinite entities in mind. It was just when they could get all of the buy-in from the importance holders. Yep, there's nothing here, and everything's superfluous. We could offer some rules of thumb, but I suppose vary according to the organisation.
Sure, you're right, Peter. You can hear from Lana asking about how the best way to identify the way to split an application component and then do the level abstraction so they can link it to the technology layer. She goes and says sometimes different parts of a component links with different technology components. And she's asking, have any ideas how you may solve that, Peter?
And what I would say is generally a different application component being on a different or linking to a different technology component. I'm actually going to turn that around to an extent and say, provided the answer there, your definition of definition of what detail you want is components sit on different technology or to relate to different technology components. So if you've got your that sit on different servers, to let detail for you. Sounds like a key part of your Lorna is what different components are hosted. The thing to bear in mind there is an application component in this environment could be a single DLL, or it could be a holder full of DLLs, or it could be a block of mainframe code. The only important thing about them is they're in different locations. So once again, I think that's a good illustration of the message I've been trying to convey. Define what are your concerns, and from that, that gives you the level of detail that you need.
Thank you, Peter. A question from Sharad Gupta, and he first of all says, good presentation, and his question is, how do you adapt the TOGAF ADM model in a federated architecture environment?
Yep, so this would be scenario, I would guess, where your organization is split. There's not much cohesion between the organizational units. And as always, something in the TOGAF spec suggests, Clear talks about segmentation and segment architectures, which is kind of an acknowledgement of the reality that each individual organization, within time, if you're trying to convince every organization to align with each other, if you have a lot of federated parts of the overall enterprise, focus on segment architectures, focus on individual architectures for the individual organizations, because you deliver quick wins. So abstraction is focus segment level, and as a start, try and identify if there are any commonalities between the top level, between the different federated parts, and from that, starting for some level of cohesion, enterprise architecture between them. Because architecture is very much of a sales activity in that you're selling your ideas. So where you can do cost savings between the federated components. From that, propose some level of commonality. Sorry, check the name of the questioner. I think it was Gupta. I can read the book Enterprise Architecture as Strategy, because it does a very good job of identifying how the operating model of an organization does fit into what your enterprise architecture activities are. So once again, enterprise architecture as strategy.
Peter, a question here from Andrzej asking the idea of the canonic data model rendered in EA information layer description.
Well, I guess it is organization. If we were just talking about a federated organization, so try to go to a data model across the whole organization, you're really painting a big red target on your back and setting yourself up to fail if you try and do that. So it's a question of, is there appetite for that within the organization? And then, always, it's a question of, do you have management backing? So identify where organization has failed in the past due to not having a canonical data model. Yes, that's a low fruit that you can pick. I can remember talking to one organization over in the States where, because they didn't have a key model of where their data flows went, a restricted price list ended up going out to their entire sales force, and they had to do some careful damage control with regulatory authorities. So now they're very open to the whole idea of a canonical data model and modeling their data architecture. So again, the organization depends on what are the pain points of the organization.
Great, thank you, Peter. I think we've just one final question here, and this is from Mike Metrian, and he asks, what are the common systems and industry-specific architectures in that order? He says, shouldn't industry-specific systems come before CS systems?
Okay, this is, I'm not sure what you're referring to there, Mike. Going to an aspect of the presentation, or?
If you're still online and you can clarify that question, that would be helpful. Just jot it into the QA facility again. While I wait to see if Mike does clarify that question, if anyone is interested in getting a copy of this slide down, I noticed that one of Peter's colleagues has put in the URL in the chat text facility. You can actually download this presentation, so please do look in the chat facility, and you can see the URL there for the presentation download. Clarification from Mike, and he's put down 2 points. Peter's put down enterprise continuum and EA continuum. Does that help with the question, Peter?
So I think Mike's question then is, why is the enterprise continuum structured like that? Why talk about, let me get straight, why does it talk about foundation architectures, then common system architectures, then industry architectures? Is there a question there?
Yes, I was referring to the enterprise continuum. Yes, that, he's clarified that's exactly what he was asking, what you said, Peter.
Okay, well, it's just that the foundation architecture is defined as being extremely high level, ambiguous. Common system is a implementation of the foundation architecture in more detail, and there is an assumption that an industry architecture is more detailed than a common systems architecture. For example, if you consider every customer-facing organization that has subscribers or customers is to have a custom system, a billing system, might implement those in a different way to a telecoms company. So, for example, telecoms has the ETOM for its implementation. With specific, it talks about the issue that telecoms customers face. They tend to subscribers, they're paying for access, pay for usage, whereas customers, yes, don't, the charges are not tied as closely to a subscription model. So I would believe that is the reasons why. Perhaps if there is somebody from the open group on the call, they could show more light to it. But that was my understanding as to why they've set to continue up in that manner.
Well, many thanks for that. I think it appears that we've come to the end of the questions there. So I think this is probably a good opportunity just to bring an end to today's event. I'd like to thank you for your time and for the presentation you made today. It was excellent. I'd also like to thank everyone who attended today. And please do keep an eye on the webinar schedule page on the Open Group website, because we do have a series of webinars coming up over the next few months. Please do keep an eye on that schedule page. Peter, once again, many thanks for your time, and I look forward to your next presentation. Many thanks.
Thank you, Simon.